To discuss this further, I'm joined now from Riyadh by Yahya al Aridi. He is a spokesman for the opposition Syrian Negotiations Commission. In Washington, we have Lawrence Korb. He is former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense and now a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. And in Stuttgart, we have Kevork Almassian. He is the founder of Syriana analysis. Thanks all so much for joining us. Let's begin in the United States. Lawrence Korb, immediately following these airstrikes, President Trump said, mission accomplished. From your perspective, what exactly was that mission and was it accomplished?
Well, basically, the mission was to degrade the chemical weapons capability of the Assad regime. And so with the strikes on the research and development facility as well as the two storage sites, they did. The question is, did they get it all? No, they didn't. The military admitted that. And the question becomes then, what will you do the next time if they do it? So if you take the narrow mission that they did degrade the capability, yes, they did. The real question is, what is the mission in Syria? Is it to be part of the negotiations? Is it to maintain the troops in northwestern Syria and provide a safe zone for the fighters who helped us defeat ISIS, as well as people who want to flee the Assad regime? That's the real question. And it seems as a result of what happened in the last week, President Trump has backed off his policy of wanting to leave Syria very, very quickly.
Okay, let's turn to Stuttgart then. And Kevork Almassian, let me ask you, did these three Western powers with these airstrikes do right by the Syrian people?
Actually, if we check the reactions of the Syrian people after the attacks, after the aggression of the Americans, the French, and the British on the Syrian soil, the reactions were enthusiastic and positive because the attack didn't achieve or didn't accomplish the mission, as Donald Trump mentioned, because his advisors and a lot of warmonger hawks in his administration were calling to destroy the air force capabilities of the Syrian government, and also to crush the backbone of the Syrian army in order not to be able to move forward and advance towards Daraa, towards the southern part city of Daraa, and also towards the east, because we know that there is a mobilization of forces going on by the Syrian army in order to fight against the Israeli proxies in Daraa, but also towards the east, where the Americans are illegally occupying a big portion of the Syrian territories under the protection of the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, where the Americans are depriving Syria from its oil resources. Therefore, the Syrians and their allies are planning and putting strategies in order to kick out the Americans from the Syrian soil. And this is, in my opinion, the main reason behind the attack. It has nothing to do with the alleged chemical attack in Douma. The Americans know that there is a consistent strategy by the Syrian and its allies in order to advance forward towards south, towards northern suburbs of Homs, towards Idlib, and most importantly, towards the eastern shores of the Euphrates. And this is a red line for the Americans because they want to deprive Syria from its oil resources in order to foil the reconstruction process. They know that President Assad and the government and the Syrian people will emerge victorious from this war, so let's deprive them from their financial resources in order to foil the reconstruction process, and also disconnect Syria from its Iraqi neighbor, and thus disconnecting Syria from Iran and the Central Asia. And this is all about geopolitical conflict and has nothing to do with the internal political process, or whether or not the Syrian government used any kind of WMDs, which they don't have, and they have destroyed all the chemical weapons in 2013 under the supervision of the OPCW and with the cooperation of the American warships in the Mediterranean.
Okay, Yahya al Aridi, as a member of the opposition, I'd like to get your take on what you heard from Kevork there. I mean, at the very least, you applaud this effort by France, the UK, and the US?
Well, first of all, we applaud any strike on Syria from whoever it comes. In particular, from this brutal regime that faced people's chance for freedom with bullets and bombs and barrel bombs. And at a certain time, with chemical weapons. And I have a real objection to the word, the alleged chemical attack. It is a chemical attack, not for the first time, but for the 400th time. And you know, in 2013, the chemical arsenal was allegedly taken from the regime and destroyed, but it has been proven that the regime continues to use chemical weapons against its own people. And that's why that strike for the killing machine, not for the killer himself or those who are perpetrating crimes against Syrians. And actually, messages were sent to those people who are supporting the regime and who are still till today denying the inspection committee access to Duma. They need time to erase any sort of traces for what they did, the crime they perpetrated. And we understand and we saw footage of Russian soldiers in Duma getting into the site of the attack, and definitely the purpose is to remove the people and remove any kind of eyewitness or somebody who would attest to the facts. However, the evidence was transferred, transmitted, and documented someplace that the attack took place, and the Assad regime and its supporters were behind that attack.
Okay, Yahya, we only have 2 minutes left with Kevork, so I can see he has a response to what you're saying there. Kevork, before we lose you, go ahead.
It's an alleged use of chemical attack because the OPCW inspectors are now in Damascus, but they are refusing to go to Duma because they said that they need an approval of the UN Security Council, where the Americans vetoed 2 days ago the Russian proposal for the inspectors to go into Duma. In 2013, there was an initial agreement between Damascus government and OPCW in order to allow the OPCW inspectors to come anytime to Syria. And Damascus government, they invited the OPCW inspectors to come to Syria to investigate the alleged use of chemical weapons in Duma. But the inspectors are now in Damascus, but they are refusing to go to Duma, claiming that they need an approval of the UN Security Council. And this is against the agreement, the initial agreement between the Damascus government and the OPCW. This is not an alleged destroying. He says that Damascus destroyed allegedly his chemical weapons, but it was approved by the American administration, it was approved by the OPCW, it was approved by the international community. Syria has no chemical weapons anymore since 2013. So any talk about the chemical use in Duma at a time when the Syrian government was one stone away from reaching victory, and when there was an agreement between Jaish al-Islam with the mediation of the Russian government with the Syrian government to take away these militants into north, this is even a 3-year-old kid cannot believe that the Syrian government might use chemical weapons against 70 civilians, which has no military value, in order to kick out Jaish al-Islam. There was already an agreement with Jaish al-Islam, and they were leaving Duma within few hours, and the attack came at a time to foil this process, to foil the leaving of the Jaish al-Islam into north, and they succeeded in this. Now the Americans came and bombed, and it's very shameful for any Syrian to cheer and say, we welcome anyone who bombs Syria. Look, he didn't even mention the Syrian regime. He said Syria. This is our nation. Are we going to clap and applaud the American and the other imperialist powers trying to bomb our countries and bomb our infrastructure that we paid from our tax money? It's unbelievable.
Okay, Kevork, we're going to have to say goodbye at this point. We're going to lose your satellite in just a few seconds' time. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on this panel. And we can now bring in the Russian perspective. Joining us from London, we have political commentator Alexander Nekrassov. Alexander, before we get to you, I first want to get Lawrence Korb's response to what we just heard from Kevork. And Lawrence, if you can tell us what motive you believe the regime actually has. They were winning in eastern Ghouta. They had that agreement with Jaish al-Islam. And in the wider context of this war, tens of people were killed in this alleged chemical attack, while thousands and thousands of people have been killed by the conventional weapons used by the regime. What interest would it serve of the Syrian regime to perpetrate this chemical attack that only allegedly killed 70 civilians?
They used the chemicals to get the rebels out of Douma more quickly. And this idea they haven't used them since 2013 is nonsense. A year ago, on April 7, 2017, they actually used planes to drop then sarin gas, and that's the first time President Trump responded. They've used them about 7 times since then, not the sarin gas, just the quote-unquote chlorine. And it's not just the United States, this is the international community. 3 out of the 5 members of the UN Security Council have said they used them. And remember, back in 2013, the British would not support President Obama when he wanted to do something. They did this time, and the French said they are absolutely certain that they did. And the fact of the matter is that, yes, we have maybe stopped the chemical, but you're right, these other horrible things still go on, and the international community needs to do something about it. Dropping barrel bombs. There's no doubt about the fact that at the same time they use the chemical weapons, they drop barrel bombs with shrapnel in there. So these horrible things they're doing, yes, they need to stop. I'm glad they stopped the chemical. I wish the international community would do more to stop this, and then the Russians would stop supporting this government and the illegal things that they do against their own people.
Okay, Alexander Nekrassov, I'll let you respond to that.
Well, first of all, this is a typical approach by the Americans who lie all the time and shout more than others and think everybody will buy their strange perception of world politics and events that happen around the world. They are the biggest aggressor in the world since the World War II. They have killed so many people that I think even dwarf Hitler and his Nazis. But let me turn to the Syrian strikes. They have nothing to do with the events in Syria at all. The Syrian strikes were conducted by 3 increasingly authoritarian governments of America, France, and Britain for their own internal political reasons. In America, Trump is under huge pressure and he needs a distraction. In France, President Macron is under enormous pressure, very unpopular president, very dubious election. How he became president still is unclear. There's a national strike going on in France. People are very, very dissatisfied with his government, so he needed a distraction. And in Britain, it's the same. Brexit, the so-called Brexit, leaving the EU, is being destroyed by Theresa May. She agreed a deal with the EU, which is so bad for Britain that in a normal, civilized, democratic state, she would have been impeached and her government would have fallen. Okay. So she needed this strike as well, just like she needed that appalling farce in Salisbury, where supposedly the Russian state was behind the poisoning of some obscure former spy who was a part of a spy exchange and whom nobody even was interested in. So you have to look outside Syria and not inside Syria for the reasons that these 3 governments broke the international law, balanced on the brinkmanship of the Third World War, and they went for it opportunistically. They will have to pay for this, by the way.
Okay, Yahya al Aridi, I'd like to get your take on this. I mean, is what we're seeing with these strikes, is it a question of global values, Western values playing out in Syria here, or is it the question of 3 Western allies exploiting an opportunity to hit Russia by proxy, as Alexander was describing?
Well, as you know, the Syrian case has been internationalized, and so many hands are interfering. And on top of those hands are the Russian hands. And everybody in the world remembers that when Putin brags about testing 200 kinds of weapons in Syria, and if he has problems inside and others have problems inside, that shouldn't be our problem. Syrian civilians, Syrian people should not pay the price for that. No Syrian would like his country to be, or her country, to be hit by anybody. And if they have to settle accounts, if there are conflicts among them, Syria shouldn't be the place where they settle their accounts. We know Putin has problems in Ukraine and in other places. He has files to take care of, and he jumped into Syria to rescue a dictatorship, a brutal regime that's killing its people. And Putin contributed to that by sending planes, by bombarding places, and the count is quite clear. Around 13,000 Syrians were killed by Russia in Syria. That is in addition to 500,000 people by the brutal regime that started with either I rule Syria or I ruin it. And he is just implementing that particular slogan. Now, the use of chemical weapons in Syria has been proven in Duma. Now, a little question about this. We know this hostility towards the white helmets. They are usually the first people who come to the rescue. And they confirmed that chemical weapons was used in that particular place. Why is it used when Assad is victorious over his people? No, they are testing the threshold, the tolerance of other people of the world, whether they can go beyond this. And we know that Iran is exercising this kind of viciousness against Syrians to promote its plans. In addition to this, no one from the Assad side, the supporters of Assad, has been hurt by any chemical attack, although the attacks were in tens or in hundreds.
Okay.
The target is those Syrian people who will say no. And for that guy from Kevork or whatever, we are not clapping for the death of our people.
Okay.
They are, we are really sad. We want the world to come to the rescue of Syria and rid it of this brutal regime and its supporters.
Understood.
That's basically what we want.
Yeah, quick. In the interest of equal time here, I just need to give Alexander just the last 30 seconds to respond before we lose our satellite connection. Go ahead, Alexander.
Well, the only thing I can say is that if Assad was a brutal dictator and nobody in Syria would have supported him, he would be long ago gone. But it's 7 years now of civil war. Assad is still there, the Syrian army is still there, and if you're going to say that it's still there,
it's because of your support. It's because of your support and Iran's support.
Hold on, you should shut up when people are talking. Get some manners, you savage. And
you shut up. You are murderers. You are murdering Syrians.
You are murderers. You are terrorists, Daesh murderers who should be prosecuted and put into prison forever.
I am an academician.
You are murderers who are funded
professor.
by Americans. You are funded by Americans.
No, we are not funded. We hate America as you love it and as you work for it.
You're not even Muslims. You are mercenaries who fight for money. So please keep quiet.
We are Muslims and we believe in God, but we don't believe in dictators.
Muslims.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to have to leave this
No, you are an agent
now.
for those dictators.
Unfortunately, this discussion is sadly indicative of the polarization of the people involved in this conflict. I'd like to thank all three of you very much for joining us on this edition of The Newsmakers.